Cavaliers double overtime over the Nets last night. Colin Sexton was the star of this one. Kind of reminded people of a young Kyrie Irving. Kyrie's first game back, and he had this to say about his re-debut.
Just 2 OTs for the first game back. Man, we definitely tried to come out and compete. I myself was just doing my best out there to pace myself, and just I know that, it's going to take me a little minute to just get up and down a few more times. But, I'm excited.
We love to overreact, and, of course, we're probably overreacting, but we shouldn't be. It's a game in January. Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated senior NBA writer. If you didn't see the game last night, Chris, how would you describe it and the importance of it?
I would describe it as revealing, at least in terms of what the Nets need to work on moving forward. I'm not at all concerned about the ability of, Kyrie, James Harden, Kevin Durant to put up points. I mean, they scored 96 in that game. I think they scored 42 of the last 57 points for Brooklyn in that game. They'll find a way to make it work offensively. But there were a couple of things that really stood out. One, the Nets don't defend anybody. And this has been, going on for most of the season. Cleveland came into that game with the 30th ranked offense. They stunk. And they were without Darius Garland. They were without Kevin Love. And they still put 147 on Brooklyn in double overtime. That needs to be addressed. They don't have a defensive stopper on the perimeter. DeAndre Jordan's best years as a rim protector are probably behind him. They don't have anybody off the bench that provides that type of presence. And they don't really trust anybody on that bench. I mean, Steve Nash, I guess, nominally played a 9-man rotation, but, Joe Harris played 42 minutes off the bench. Nobody else played more than 12. Meanwhile, Kevin Durant, who is not that far removed from an Achilles tear, played 50 minutes. James Harden, in his third game with the Nets, played 50, his third straight with 40-plus. Kyrie Irving, off for 2 weeks, goes for 45. Steve Nash either needs to start trusting the guys on his bench, or Sean Marks has to go out there and find a way to get him guys if he does.
Yeah, I think you're going to have scoring, and then defense is going to be optional. And I think you have to have a concept for defense, and then you have to have a willingness to want to play defense as well. It feels like Kevin Durant is the one guy who can play defense or will play defense, but trying to add to your roster at this point in the season or later in the season, what's the feasibility of that, Chris?
Not much at this point during the season. I mean, you can scour the G League when they get started in early February to see if anybody kind of fits that mold. Their trade options are extremely limited because of what they gave up in the James Harden deal. What they have to be hoping for is that the buyout market yields a player that fits what they're looking for. I mean, every year there seems to be 2 or 3 guys that hit that market that can make an impact on a contending team. The difference this year, though, Dan, is that the expansion of the play-in tournament is going to make a lot more teams feel like they're in contention. So if you're a team that's sitting there at 11th or 12th, but you're only a couple of games back from 9th or 10th, you're going to think, all right, maybe I won't buy this guy out because we have a chance to get into the postseason. That could depress the buyout market, and if that happens, that's not good news for the Nets.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I hadn't thought of that, but if I'm the Lakers, if I'm the Sixers, if I'm the Bucks or the Heat, like how concerned do you think these teams should be and are with what's going on in Brooklyn?
Concerned might be too strong a word. You're certainly watching every game they play to see if their defense becomes, passable enough to catch up with their offense. And they don't have to be a top 10 defensive team. They just need to be probably top 15, top half of the NBA to be a championship contender. So I'd be watching them because, look, the playoffs comes down to guys that can get you buckets. And the Nets now have 3 guys that individually can get you buckets. And that's an incredibly valuable part of this. But, another sidelight here, Dan, is to make big threes work, you've got to have sacrifice. Kyrie even alluded to this, last night in his media interview after the game. You've got to have guys willing to sacrifice. And somebody in that group is going to have to really sacrifice in the way that Chris Bosh did and Kevin Love did in their time as members of Big Three. Kyrie would seem to be the guy that would need to do that. But I'm struck by this about Kyrie. I mean, Kyrie, he's a quirky guy. Like you should, if you're Kyrie Irving, you should be excited about the possibility of playing with James Harden and Kevin Durant. And maybe he is. He's saying all the right things right now. But you have to remember, Kyrie was part of a championship team in Cleveland, and he forced his way out with 2 years left in his contract. Yeah. He was part of a really good team in Boston. He said he was going to come back, and then he said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. He wanted to control his own destiny badly in the summer of 2019, and he did that. He signed with Brooklyn, his hometown team, in a way. He signed to play with Kevin Durant, his best friend in the league. He picked his situation for the first time in his career, and now he's back in a similar place where he's having kind of his career dictated to him by the addition of James Harden. That to me bears watching, Dan, how Kyrie reacts to once again being in a situation that was not of his choosing.
Did we learn anything from his press conference?
Just that whatever is going on in his life is still wearing on him. I mean, I'm not. I don't like to wade too deep into the psyche of Kyrie Irving and what really impacts him and what doesn't. But you can't watch that press conference and think that everything in Kyrie's world is okay. I mean, he was asked if he was okay. He just basically nodded in the affirmative. I don't know how it manifests itself. If he's able to push past it to play basketball at a high level, but it's pretty clear that what pushed Kyrie away from the game in early January is still lingering with him now.
What do you think of the Lakers so far?
You're almost waiting for any kind of bump along the way. I mean, maybe they get it on this road trip. They start a 7-game road trip tonight against Milwaukee. That'll be a fun matchup. I got to think in this game, Dan, LeBron and Anthony Davis go right at Giannis. I mean, LeBron, as you know, still remembers every slight against him, and is still, I think, bristling a little bit from not getting as many MVP votes as he should have had. And Anthony Davis thought he was Defensive Player of the Year last year and not Giannis. So I think they're going to go at Giannis pretty good in this game tonight. But the Lakers they haven't had their season interrupted by COVID. The guys they brought in have pretty much worked from Dennis Schroeder on down. And LeBron is playing at an MVP level while I think playing the fewest minutes per game in his career. So it's just they're not really a story because nothing has slowed their ascent. They're picking up exactly where they left off last season.
Quiet is good in Lakerland. Yeah. As we found out with Frank Vogel, quiet is good. It leads to championships. Chris, thanks as always for joining us. We appreciate your time, bud.
You guys have.
That's Chris Mannix. He covers the NBA for Sports Illustrated, senior writer. I was wondering about James Harden, and I was wondering how this is a new James Harden. Now, you can say, is it a new and improved James Harden? Let me give you some numbers here. Because Harden has looked different than a year ago, really from his past. So this year, if you look at what he's doing, his scoring is down 8.5 points per game. Now, still almost 26 points per game. He's taking 17.5 field goal attempts per game. That's his lowest figure since 2013. Just under 8 free throw attempts per game. That's his lowest since 2011. That was his last year in Oklahoma City when he was coming off the bench. He's averaging double-figure assists for only the second time in his career. Harden played all 10 minutes of overtime last night, but he took only 3 shots from the field and 2 free throws. He is trying, it feels like, to ingratiate himself to the offense in a different way. And that is, I have to be the point guard here. I don't think Kyrie's capable or willing to do that. But with James Harden, I think he knows that this is the role that I have to play here. By the way, their next game against the pesky Cleveland Cavaliers. Yes, Paulie.
Harden is averaging 29 points and 13 assists in his first 3 games with the Nets, but he's averaging 19 shots, which for him is on the lower end because the past few years, going back a few years, 20, 24, 22 shots a game when he's at his peak of scoring.
And you couldn't help but watch Colin Sexton last night, or if you saw the highlights, that's a young Kyrie Irving. And I remember when Sexton was coming out of Alabama, he had this crazy competitive nature and so much energy. Like if you watched him play, I didn't think Alabama was any good, but you couldn't take your eyes off of him because he was just so full of energy. He's not a great shooter, but he's a confident shooter. There's a difference in that. They're just guys who aren't afraid to take those shots. Well, sometimes you don't want them to take those shots. But Sexton is not what I would consider an elite shooter, but he is a confident shooter. And confidence, when you get to that level, I mean, that sometimes can separate you. You're not afraid to take the shot, the big shot. And he's certainly not afraid, and you saw that last night. I mean, when you're scoring 20 consecutive points at one point, and you don't have Kevin Love in there, you don't have Garland in there, and that's a makeshift Cleveland lineup, and they ended up picking up the win. I thought it said more about Cleveland than it did about the Nets. Like, I sort of figure what the Nets are going to be. It's going to be like a beautiful mess where you're just going to go, all right, that's the Nets, or playing at an extremely high level, or there'll be games when, nobody plays well, shoots well. Cleveland, I give Cleveland a lot of credit because you don't have two of your better players, and makeshift lineup against the Nets, that was impressive. And Sexton was taking it right to him. He wasn't afraid. And it reminded me of a young Kyrie Irving.